Okay, let's take a peek at the TCP flags. Now you will need to know these flags. You should be able to identify these in different types of output that you may be seeing from different tools. So a lot of times, again, you're just going to see the first letter of each of these flags, and should be able to identify those from there. You also need to be able to look at other information that has to do with the flags. The questions will be pretty straightforward when it comes to that, but a lot of times they're going to be in decimal representations or hexadecimal representations, and you need to be able to identify those and then also calculate the correct value if certain flags are being used and so forth. The questions that may come across on that will be pretty straightforward. They're going to give you the numbers, and then you just figure out what flags are used and then count the numbers together. All right, so we have again the synchronized flag, which is synchronizes the sequence number. All right, so it has an initial sequence SYN that goes out, and voila, you get that. Now, anytime we get a SYN out, it generally comes back with a SYN acknowledgement, and here the acknowledgement has an acknowledgement of the sequence number. We have what's called a final flag or a FIN flag, and this is the final data bit which is used during the 4-step teardown sequence. Now, what we have there with the FIN is basically we're breaking down the connection, but we're doing so gently. Another example would be something like, let's say you had a phone call and you called someone and you wanted to hang up. And what happens is you would say, hey, okay, it's time to go. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Right? You know that it's coming. It's basically we're doing a soft hang up, and that's where the final bit flag or the FIN flag comes in. Now we have what's called the reset or the RST flag. Now the reset bit's used to close the connection without going through the 4-step teardown sequence. So that means we're doing this abruptly. All right, so go back to the phone scenario I was just doing. So when you're on the phone with someone and let's say you just hang up without saying goodbye or anything else, or the connection just gets dropped, that would be a reset. All right, so know the differences between a FIN and a reset. One's used when the other one's used. And you should be able to identify those when it comes to looking at output and so forth. Obviously, it's going to be somewhat easily identifiable, F for FIN and R for reset, and so forth. Anyhow, so FIN and reset, know the difference between the two. And you need to know the difference between push and urge. Now, push data bits are used to signify that the data in the packet should be put at the beginning of the queue of data to be processed. So basically, any data that's going through the buffer would then be sent out. So we're pushing what's in the buffer out, basically. Now the urgent flag, here the urgent data bit is used to signify that there's urgent control characters in the packet that need to be processed immediately. So here we're actually sending it out immediately, not what's in the buffer, we're just sending it straight out. Scenario there might be something like the printer. A lot of times when you print to the printer, it prints to the print spool, and then it prints to the printer, but you do have the ability to print to the printer directly. And that's maybe the difference between your push and your urge. All right, and know the differences thereof and how that all works out, and take it from there. All right. Okay. Now let's take a look at some of the scans. Now again, we mentioned this thing called Nmap. It's a network mapper, and it allows us to do some really cool things. Now, some important things about this is that you need to get some idea of how to use Nmap and how the results are coming back and forth and so forth from that. So let's start off, first of all, with the TCP Connect port scan. Now with the TCP Connect port scan, the attacker sends a SYN packet to sequential port numbers on the target to see which port numbers reply. Connection is tried to port 1, port 2, port 3, and so forth. Now keep in mind they may not be in that order necessarily, but they will do at least the first 1,023 ports. All right, now an open port will reply with a SYN-ACK, and a closed port will reply with a reset acknowledgement or no reply if it's filtered. And if it's filtered, it basically means there's a stateful firewall blocking it. All right, and that's where that means. So know what the TCP Connect port scan looks like, know what the open response is, and what the closed response is for a closed port. And again, sometimes it may be as simple as just knowing little bits of information to get you through some of the tough questions. All right, and with the way we're doing this here, you should be able to answer any of the questions that have to do with Nmap with what you're seeing here on the videos and so forth, okay? So again, if you have the opportunity, please try it out and give it a shot and see what you get with your results in regards to what it looks like and things like that. All right. Now we have what's called a SYN scan, or a half open scan. Okay, this is called a half open. And basically, as you can see, it's a half open because it doesn't complete the three-way handshake. Right? An open port will still reply with a SYN-ACK, and a closed port will reply with a reset acknowledgement. The advantage over TCP Connect scan is that it may not be detected by your simple intrusion detection systems, and no law generally has been broken at this time. All right, so you can see here, open port response. We have a SYN-ACK. Rather than completing the three-way handshake, it sends a reset flag back. On a closed port, we get an immediate reset acknowledgement back. Okay, this is called a half-open scan, also known as a SYN scan. Could also be known as a stealth scan. Now, the one previous with the TCP scan is also known as the vanilla scan, and also could be considered a connect scan. All right, here again, as we mentioned, the firewall ports, a TCP Connect half open scan should receive either a SYN acknowledgement or a reset acknowledgement packet. However, a third possibility exists, which would be no response. This is often due to the firewall port being filtered or possibly the packets being lost due to network congestion. Most likely not, but anyhow. So, but here we're basically saying when it comes back filtered, it means that there's a firewall blocking it, right? In this case, firewall port response. So here again we see the Nmap TCP Connect scan, right? It's also known as the TCP Connect scan, which we saw here a couple of slides ago. And again, what you need to do here, we see a screenshot of the ZenMap, which is basically Nmap's GUI version. And then from here, you pretty much can check boxes and things like that to get what you need, rather than typing it in all from scratch and so forth. What we can do here too is let's say you wanted to do adjacent subnets, for instance, and so forth, right? Generally, what you would do is you put in the target IP of, let's say, 192.168.2.0 with a /24, which is your CIDR notation of 24. That means scan the entire Class C subnet of 192.168.2, right, with a default subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. So it means the Class C will scan then 254 IPs. Now, what we could do if you had, for instance, the 192.168.2, and you wanted to maybe get 5 different subnets, the way you would put that in is something like Nmap with the 192.168.2-6, for instance, right? That would take you from the .2 to the .3, .4, and .5, and it will give you those subnets that you can then run from there. Okay, and that's how you would actually run it if you wanted to do adjacent Class C in this particular case, since we're using a 192 Class C address. All right, so those are some of the things, again, you need to kind of look into and so forth along with that. Now, other things we need to get into. Again, we'll see a few of these in action as well with using Nmap. And actually, let me see if I can pop something up here for you. So here, let's hop into Kali real quick. And let's go ahead and try some of this out. I'm going to do an ifconfig to see what I'm actually on here. ifconfig always helps. All right, so I'm on the .40 network. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run Nmap. I can just run Nmap with defaults 192.168.40.0 with a /24. Right, this is the CIDR notation of 24. So that means it's going to go out there and actually do an Nmap scan on the Class C subnet of 40, right? So the 40 subnet of 255.255.255.0 on our Class C there. And we should be getting some results back here in just a moment. Now, some of the things, again, if you have the opportunity to try it out, make sure you have at least one other target out there on your same network. If you're using Kali or if you're using your Backtrack or whatnot. You can see here 4 hosts are up and running. Took about 30 seconds almost to complete. And as you can see, it went to 356 addresses, which includes the 255 and the 0. But here we can see we have report for 40-20, which has 58 and 5900, which is basically VNC and VNC over HTTP. Okay. Now we have some other ones here. This is 40-24. You can see here we have everything from 723, which is pretty popular, 53, 80, 135, 39, 445. Indicates that we can do a null session to it, which also tells us it's the Windows box. Now, what else we have here that may be pertinent? Again, it's 58, 5900 for VNC, And then these are some of the dynamic numbers that we see here. But nothing really else besides Telnet that could give us away, and of course DNS 53 and such. Now let's take a peek up here. This is 40-23 results. See here 135, 139, 445. So it's also a Windows box. It also has 3389. Now 3389 is very important because this is a remote desktop protocol. So this is RDP. And it basically tells us we can use RDP to connect to it remote desktop. Very good. Let's see what else we got. We have a DAT22. Here we have FTP on this one, SSH, Telnet, SMTP, domain name, right? Pretty cool. So we have a lot of cool things here. So what we're going to do then is I'm going to use the 22 as our next target specifically. So what I want to do this time is I want to figure out some things. So what you can do is you can put in something like nmap, and I'm going to use a -O option, uppercase O. And what this is going to do, it's going to go out there and give us an operating system information regarding that particular target. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. O for operating system. Okay. Let's take a peek here, and it will try to identify it and then give us results back into what it thinks it is. Okay, and as you can see here, it's telling us that the OS, in this case, since it's running a whole bunch of stuff, it's telling us here that it actually is VMware, obviously, but it's telling us it's running Linux 2.6x. And there it is. It's giving us the details here. So almost fooled me as a Microsoft basis because it's running 445 and 139, which a lot of times gives us away. However, you can see here 514, which is also important to remember. This is actually going to be the port number for syslog, and that's going to be Unix based. You can see here X11, that's also Unix at 6000, but not important to know for exam purposes. Okay, anyway, 514 is important to know. That's for, again, known as the syslog. All right, and of course some of the other ones here, 53, 25, 23, 22. Those are all important ones to remember when it comes down to that. All right, now what this basically means on this Linux box is that it's basically using some of the shared services that Microsoft also has. Whenever you share out a particular folder in Microsoft, it will open up those ports. So when you do file and printer sharing, those are the ports that will basically be opened up for that, and those are going to be 139, 445. A lot of times when you just see those, you would identify this as a Windows box. However, here it's saying that it's actually a Linux box. All right, so that's the .22. Okay, other things we can do. I'm going to stick with that same one here, and of course we can do all kinds of other things. We can do service versioning and things like that. So what we can do is we can now add things in something like SV, right, for service versioning, and we're trying to figure out what the versions are of the services that are running and things like that. So we can use different switches again like this that allows us to go in and check out some things. Remember, when we have some of these ports open, right, we can identify certain type of attacks. Right? Remember what SMTP is, your Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. And we can use it as a mail relay server, right? Things like that. Now, keep in mind, when you want to scan a network for potential targets, you're going to be using nmap. Right? It's going to be pretty straightforward there, and so forth. If you wanted to find out what some of the, I'm going to run this here. If you want to find out what some of the different switches are and so forth that you can use in nmap, feel free to look up the man pages for that and see what comes up with and such. And we'll see here what the results are coming back from this. So we should be getting some results back regarding the service version that's running. So we'll figure out what FTP is, what SSH it's running, and so forth. And a lot of times too, what you can do is run specific type of port numbers. So once this comes back, I'll show you what that looks like. And let me take this opportunity too to mention again, make sure you have an opportunity to check out some of the type and codes of your ICMP error messages and figure out which ones that can be used out there, because you may get a question or two on that as well. Now, some of the port numbers that I'm not seeing on here that you need to know about is Kerberos. And Kerberos is used for authenticating your username and password on a Windows domain environment. It runs off of port 88. All right, that's going to be important to remember. Port 88 is for Kerberos. Port 110 for POP3, right? 25 for SMTP, 2021 for FTP, things like that. 445 is basically SMB over TCP IP. We have 389, which is also found a lot on Windows environment, domain environments, because it's running LDAP, your Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, running at 389. Not to be confused with 3389, which is for remote desktop. Another big one might be NTP, your Network Time Protocol, and it runs simply off of port 123. 123 for NTP. All right, we should hopefully be getting some results back here in just a moment. Almost there. Okay, and there we go. And as you can see, we're getting a lot of information back. So we get the service that's running, obviously, and then the version of it, which is great because that tells us then what we can actually use against that particular target. If we know that there's a specific version, like on Pro FTPD 1.3.1, and we did a little research and found out that 1.3.1 has specific vulnerabilities that we can exploit because they didn't upgrade to 1.3.2, then we could use that, right? And of course, for that, we need to be able to identify different versions. That's why it's important to figure out the versions. You can also determine, too, by looking at some of these numbers, is if they've maybe updated to a latest service pack or latest patch and so forth, and things like that. So those are definitely some things you can check out and investigate a little further and so forth. So if I wanted to take the 2 scans I just did and maybe specify only a specific port, let's say we wanted to stick with port 21 here, the VSFTP D.2.3.4, what I could do is put in something like this, nmap -O for our operating system, right? And then we do a -SV, right? With service versioning, which we just did, and then we can do a -P where we can specify a specific port, in our case 21. We can also specify other port numbers by putting a comma in there, let's say 53. Let's say we wanted to also figure out port 514 maybe, something like that. Again, 514 for your syslog. And let's do 8180, just to be, just to try something out, 8180. All right, something like that. And then, of course, we give it the IP address, in this case, 192.168.40.22, something to that effect. And then we can actually see it. Now, it's only going to go out there and give us the results back from those 4 port numbers that we specified. However, it's going to do the same thing as we did before individually. It's going to give us the operating system version and service versioning along with that as well. And let's take a peek at what the output will look like just on those, and then we'll move on. Again, if you have the opportunity to try some things out, try them out using Nmap, your network mapper. It's a great little tool. It allows you to do a lot of cool things, and it's a pretty sweet deal. Again, anytime you're trying to get some reliable Nmap scans in, you want to do a connect scan, also known as a vanilla scan. And again, it's the TCP Connect scan. All right, it's also known as that. Very good. Okay, so as you can see here, we have the results. We have our specific port numbers, gave us those 4 ports that we looked at, and gave us some information, OS details, and all that good fun stuff, right? So really good stuff. Again, check it out. If you get an opportunity, check it out. All right, good stuff. Now we move on into the enumeration overview. Also, before we get to this, I wanted to mention real quick too is that on some of the other Nmap types related scenarios, just look at the output and make a logical choice on what the answer is. So if you're seeing something like output, like a open port equals this, closed port equals that. Let's say we do a fin with a no response for an open port and a fin with a reset acknowledgement for a closed port, you can almost take a really good guess on what the correct answer would be, right? And so forth. Same thing with some of your other types of scans. Just look at the scan, see what it's actually doing, and you should be able to actually go in and choose the correct answer by looking at the screenshot. Sometimes the answers will be right in there with the question itself. So keep that in mind as you're going out there and trying some of these things out. All right. One thing we haven't mentioned in the previous example was doing an idle scan. Now, when we do an idle scan, there's something very important that generally happens.